Hey, folks, and welcome to Typology, the show on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and the great human adventure, all through the lens of the Enneagram. My name is Anthony Skinner, your producer and co-host. Hey, folks, I'm glad you're here. We've got a really great guest today. So, two parts, right? On the Enneagram side of things, she comes in, our guest. I'm going to hold her name just for a minute. And she's taken Ian's assessment. She is not familiar with the Enneagram, perhaps even a little bit skeptical, tested high 7, high 8, and we walk through 7 or 8 throughout the podcast. So that's really cool, and that's a lot of fun. Then she's got this great new book from which she practices some of the principles of this book in real time with Ian as she asks him some questions. And I think it's very powerful. So now let me tell you her name and give you some of her history and tell you the title of this book that you're going to want to go get. Emily Kasriel. That's who I'm talking about. An award-winning journalist, editor, and she was media executive for more than 20 years at the BBC. We all love the BBC here at Typology. She is also a senior visiting research fellow at King's College London's Policy Institute, and she is an accredited executive coach and workplace mediator. So that's a bit of her resume. But check this out. She's authored a new book, Deep Listening, Transform Your Relationships with Family, Friends, and Foes. In this book, she lays out this really simple but powerful 8-step approach to moving beyond surface level conversations. And she does a little bit of a practicum for us with Ian today. So you're going to want to listen to this. You're going to want to get this book, and you're going to love this conversation with Emily. I'm so glad you're here today, folks. That's it for me, Anthony Skinner. And now, without any further ado, here's the man of the hour, Ian Cron.
Hello, Typology family. Welcome back. We are delighted that you're here. Today is a big day. We have a new friend in the house, Enneagram 8, possibly Enneagram 7, Emily Kasriel, coming to us from Vassar College today, but normally the UK. Emily, welcome to Typology.
Thank you so very much, Ian. Delighted to be here.
I am so excited to speak to you, particularly about this new book of yours, Deep Listening, Transform Your Relationships with Family, Friends, and Foes. Because if there's one thing we could use a little bit more of in this day and age, it's deep listening. So yes. I want to begin by maybe clearing up something for you, which is you're not sure if you're an 8 or a 7. You took my assessment. You're brand new to the Enneagram. You took my assessment. And sometimes what happens, if somebody has a wing, and just for your sake, Emily, since you're new to it, what is the wing? So the wing, your core type, let's say if you were an 8, you could have either a 7 wing or a 9 wing. So it's one of those two numbers adjacent to your core type, right? You actually have both wings, but one tends to be stronger than the other, right? Now, what that wing does is it seasons or colors the water of your type, your dominant type, right? So if you're an 8 with a 7 wing, let's say, you are a type 8, but you're colored by some of the characteristic strengths and challenges of the 7, right? So it's a nuanced kind of variant of your core type. Does that make sense? And so, sometimes what happens is people take a test and their wing is so heavy, it's so influential that you get into this blurry space between the two types, right? Like, am I an 8? Am I a 7? Am I a 7 or an 8? And so let's see if we can't tease it out and land on it. What determines type is a person's core motivation. So I'm going to make two statements and you tell me which one sounds more like you than the other. Okay? They may both sound like you, but which one sounds more like you than the other? Okay?
Yep, I'm up for it.
So the first statement is this: I have a need to assert strength and control over others in the environment in order to mask vulnerability and weakness. That's the first one. And then the second one would be, I have a need to pursue adventures, fascinating possibilities, new ideas in order to stave off negative or darker emotions?
I'm not sure I quite agree with either. I'm very interested in the word need because I think I've come to a place where I don't have a need, because a need to me speaks of oughts or shoulds, and they can be quite destructive. But I'm definitely on the second, which I can hear is a 7. And I would say more, I feel more inspired by, or I feel more excited, or I feel more energized by those things rather than a need which could come with a different light, which I don't feel that comfortable with.
So when I say need, another word that I might put there is drive.
Yeah, drive I'm happier with. And then I would definitely say the latter, which I mind senses puts me into a 7, which I am more comfortable with. But I think I probably do, or certainly when I was younger, maybe a more innate feeling that I need to be in control and so forth. But I think I've navigated away from that, so I don't have that same need, and I more feel inspired and energized by adventure and doing new things and understanding new ways of looking at the world.
Wonderful. So when life feels threatening or overwhelming, do you tend to take charge and confront it assertively and head on, or do you often look for an escape hatch or distractions or new possibilities to extricate yourself from it?
I have to say, in that instance, I would do the former. When I'm feel defensive and threatened, I tend to want to take charge and sort things out. So that in that instance, I would be more of an 8.
Yes. So do you more often see yourself as a protector, defender of others, or an optimist who can reframe anything positively?
I'm not sure either of them strike too true for me. I'm sorry to be a complicated one who doesn't want to fit in a neat box.
Oh, I like it. I like it. I like it. That's okay.
I have to say, it's good to reference maybe how you might have been earlier in life as well, before you became as self-aware maybe as you are. So some of these things, it might be helpful to reference, how did I handle that in my 20s?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question about how I used to be. And I think, as I said, definitely when I felt under threat when I was younger, I would want to take charge and take control and felt like I had to come up with answers. And I remember doing that distinctly on a management course many, many years ago when they put us in a scenario of building a bridge or something and it wasn't going well. And I felt a real overwhelming drive to take control. And I look back at that and think how inappropriate it was as a leader to behave in that way.
Yeah.
So I think I definitely used to be like that.
So let me ask you just a few more questions. And I'm just poking around and I'm just trying to get a feel for things. When uncomfortable, afflictive kinds of emotions arise, do you instinctively push through them with force and intensity, or do you move away by keeping busy, planning, or finding something enjoyable to do?
Well, I suppose I've come to a place that I become curious. Like I go, whoa, something is going on here you're feeling quite strong. And I try and listen to myself and try and get to understand what it is that I'm triggered by, what's going on inside me. So I think a place of curiosity rather than either pushing through or being distracted, I would say.
Okay. What about at 25?
25?
When you were 25, when you were 25 years old, how would you have answered that question?
So when I was 25, how do you know I'm not still 25, huh? When I was 25...
Challenger just came out.
Wow.
So when I was 25, would I have confronted or moved away? Would I have... What was the question again?
Pushed through with...
I would have pushed through.
Okay, you would have pushed through.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you were 25 years old, which felt harder, being vulnerable and soft or staying with sadness, boredom, and limitations?
I think both of them.
Oh, you got to pick one.
I got to pick one. So when I was 25...
staying with sadness, boredom, or limitations?
What was harder? Probably being vulnerable.
Yeah. Okay. Just a couple more questions. This is really good for people to hear, right? Because this is what has a lot of our people have to do, right? Is this work of discernment, right? And self-reflection. What I'm picking up is that you have done so much personal work that you have a high level of self-awareness. And so your answers want to be more nuanced. And I'm trying to be a little bit more simplistic, right? And that's why I'm saying, let's go back to 25 when your personality was really florid, right? And a little off the leash, which is true of all of us because most people at 25 have a lower self-awareness quotient, right? Like they're just, what they are, right? Life has not dealt them any serious blows to soften some of the edges of their personalities, right? So back when you were 25, did you most want to be in control so others couldn't control you, or to be free so that nothing pinned you down?
To be free, in terms of a positive drive.
Yeah, you're coming up.
I'm pretty much down the road, aren't I? I won't be put into either box. What do we do?
Well, I mean, we can keep going, but I think let's keep having a conversation and more shall be revealed. Let's just keep talking and more shall be revealed. Okay. You are in that 8-7 zone, right? And you could be a 7 with a very strong 8 wing or an 8 with a very strong 7 wing.
Are you arguing in this classification that people have an internal, because as a coach, sometimes we talk about people's natural strengths and then their learned strengths. And it's like what you do naturally at your most instinctive when you were 25. And yet we can all develop and change. And in fact, one of the arguments that I make in the book is that we're all in a process of becoming. We're not the person we were when we were 25, last year, last month, or even last night. And therefore we must listen to people without assuming they're stuck in that same personhood with the same thinking.
Yeah. So what the Enneagram would suggest is that people have unconscious forces that govern their lives, right, from the shadows, right? One, namely, might be a core motivation, right? And that they are both, and this is my opinion, both a biological drives and learned. Right? They're both. You can't just say personality is not just the product of either one of those things. It's both, right? In my opinion. So within type, though, a person evolves, right? And because personality operates on a continuum between, let's say, low self-awareness and high self-awareness, health and unhealth, and we're kind of moving around on it, on a moment-to-moment basis, right? We tend to camp out maybe in certain areas longer than we do in the alternative, but we can evolve and change within type. So it's not a hard and fast concretized typology, right? It's saying that there's it's very dynamic. It understands that the human personality is very dynamic and fluid and adaptive, right? When it's healthy. So, just to answer your question, I think who you are, like who I am as a 64-year-old man, I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, is so different from who I was at 25. But that's because I've been through a lot. I've done life for 40 years since then. And I'm very grateful. And to your point, and I agree, in fact, I often tell clients, your partner, when you wake up in the morning, you should just sort of see them as a stranger because they have spent 8 hours not in your presence and they have changed, right? Like, or when they come home from work, you're in the presence of a stranger in some ways, right? Because they have experienced things and learned or been set back or in all sorts of ways, right? Which speaks to your value on curiosity, right? Like it's important to be curious. Well, how have you changed in the past 8 hours? And we don't often think of those kinds of categories. All right, let's talk about deep listening. Tell me what it is first. Tell me how you would define deep listening.
Well, I think the way that we ordinary listen, we are performing listening. We go through the motions. We preload our verbal gun with ammunition ready to fire. We interrupt people. I mean, I used to be a serial interrupter because I was helping people. I was completing their sentences with them, for them, just kind of helping them find a knotty way of saying something that they were struggling with, or I wanted to cheer them up, or I felt it's my role to provide a solution. And so many of us listen in that way all of the time. And instead, what deep listening is, it's about the whole of you listening to the whole of them. It's about listening to ourselves first. And we talked about becoming more self-aware. And I have had a journey of self-awareness, but I'm sure there's a lot more to go too. And so we listen to ourselves first, especially when we disagree. And we talked about curiosity, because when we're truly curious about someone else, it can lead to empathy and even respect. So this type of listening has an ambition to truly understand another person. It builds trust, and it also drives engagement and connectedness. And it's so critical, especially when we disagree. But what's important is that listening and agreement are not the same things. So when we conducted research for my book on deep listening with 2,000 people across the US with YouGov, we found that young people, Gen Z in particular, especially equated listening with agreement. And that's why they didn't want to listen. And when I've worked with people across the world in boardrooms and in conflict zones, I help people separate listening from agreement in order that they can listen more.
Hey friends, the Enneagram is a remarkably powerful tool for improving relationships. Whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, understanding the people around you is critical to building better relationships. Enneagram provides a framework for understanding different perspectives and communication styles. Imagine knowing why your colleague reacts defensively in meetings or why your partner needs space when they're stressed. Understanding these dynamics helps you navigate both your inner world and your relationships with more empathy, patience, and compassion. It's like having a cheat sheet for human behavior. Don't know your type? Well, find out today with my new Typology Institute Enneagram assessment at typologyinstitute.com/assessment. And be sure to enter the discount code Typology Podcast on the checkout page to take 10% off your assessment. Go to typologyinstitute.com/assessment. I love that. So you were saying earlier that when you were younger, that you were a serial interrupter, you were completing people's sentences, you wanted to cheer them up. When you were with somebody who was having a difficult experience, sadness, depression, anxiety, grief, whatever the case may be, did you feel compelled to fix that person, to leap in and fix that person? Now, this is going to take a little honesty here, right? In order to solve the problem for them, or because you were so uncomfortable with their uncomfortable feeling that you were solving it for you? That's
a very interesting question. And it was a mixture of both. I think I was not comfortable with, and I'm talking exaggeration, I don't think I was quite this bad, but I think there's a level of discomfort with pain that I didn't feel comfortable with, as well as my own desire to make it better for them. And I know from having, brought up 2 kids, we often want our kids to feel better. And when they come home from school with a difficult story, we tell them that it's not so bad after all and all the reasons they should be cheerful. And I certainly did that as a parent. And I now learn, even just now, my now adult daughter, she left me a voicemail and I left her another voicemail. She's losing her apartment. She's working in Germany. And instead of saying, oh, it's not that bad, I'm sure you find, I said, that's really tough. I know how much you love the plants in your apartment and how it made you feel at home there. And because I was able to recognize her discomfort, the next voicemail came back to me saying, actually, I don't think it's that bad. I can live with my boyfriend, or I can, I'm sure I'll find a new place and I've got plenty of time. And it was because I was able to stay with her discomfort that allowed her to be able to come up with solutions and feel positive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. So you just said, and also you had made an interesting statement. You said, I've been on a journey of self-awareness. Can you tell me about that journey?
Well, that's a big question. How have I been on that journey? I mean, so many things that have allowed me to, I think when I had really great coaching, executive coaching in my leadership role at the BBC, that was super helpful in pointing out to me assumptions. Like I said, I remember one very distinct moment when I was talking about being really driven by doing creative work. And I said, but of course, everybody is like that. And my coach said, oh, really? Everyone? And he just reflected back in a way that made me think, oh, maybe not. And then when I became a coach myself and was given the privilege of people sharing really deep thoughts about themselves, about what inspires and motivates them, and I realized how different we all are. And I think both of those experiences have helped me become more aware of myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the ways that we talk about self-awareness is this capacity to stand back from one's present moment experience, to monitor and regulate the way that we are acting, thinking, and feeling and responding in the moment. And to also the capacity, I think, to pull back the lens to see a broader landscape so that we don't screw down and become hyper-focused on something that may be negative or positive, right? Like but to pull back this camera and to live less in this sort of reactive state and more in this responsive state. And is that a strength for you?
It has become one. And in my book, I share a lot of research from a lot of academic journals, as well as interviews with people who listened in the most high stakes contexts, people who are hostage negotiators or listening to people on the verge of taking their own life, or, artists who are listening in lots of different ways. And my own experience when, for example, I was interviewing the president of Ethiopia and in my role at the BBC in my early stage of my career, and I was so driven by trying to hold him accountable and nailing him that I just didn't listen, and I missed an opportunity to have amazing insights about a phenomenally interesting character who also had a dark side to him. And it's not that I shouldn't have held him to account, but I could have also been ready to understand him and been interested. And I completely, in my book, Deep Listening, I've got a lot of inspiration and thoughts on how to step back, on how to understand ourselves better. I also illustrated the book and write at length about the shadows inside us which get triggered and how we can become, we can start on that journey about understanding ourselves better in order to be able to dial down the extremity of the shadows. And in fact, when I was doing this very big project with the BBC and British Council, when we recruited 1,000 people in over 100 countries with a deep listening project, and it was really disparate. Most represented countries were New Zealand, UK, Malaysia, and Iran. So a very disparate group of people. And we found that those who practiced deep listening, even when they discussed a very controversial topic around which they disagreed, those who practiced deep listening were not only safer to express themselves and felt more genuinely understood, they also felt more connected with their partners, and they became more open to re-examine their own attitudes. And that is critical. And that's just been published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Applied Social Psychology, your bedtime reading, not. But that was so important for me to, to have that demonstration that deep listening actually can work to allow you to take that step back and allow you to see that more than one perspective can help enlighten you.
Yes. So there's an 8-step process to the deep listening model. Can you just briefly walk us through it?
Sure. Well, step one is about creating the space. So when you're about to have a really important conversation, hey, Ian, if I were to ask you, do you want a cup of tea? And then I was to do the 8 steps, you'd probably throw the tea in my face. Yeah. We're talking here about important conversations where you need to repair a relationship, where you think very differently to the other person, or you have there's power relationship dynamic going on. So step one is about creating the space. And first of all, most important, psychological safety for the person. Open plan office, not surprisingly, not the best place to ask your colleague why they got issues with their timekeeping. But it's also a space where, if you think about the needs of you and your speaker, if there's loads of glass and metal, not good to listen. If harsh overhead, blue, white light, not so good. Side yellow lights, far better. And even more where they can feel cherished. Perhaps your partner's favorite Adele track in the background. And I spent time with Japanese tea ceremony practitioners who will rotate the vessel so that the most beautiful side is facing their guest, so they will feel truly cherished. Step two is about listening to yourself first. So before you're going to have a difficult conversation or an important conversation, you ask, what's really going on for you? What's at stake? What's most important to you? What's your true agenda? And perhaps the relationship might be even more important than the win you thought was most important. And then there's the family of shadows, those parts of you that you keep repressed. Maybe your colleague reminds you of your bullying uncle. And so you're not listening to your colleague, you're listening to your bullying uncle. And again, you're aged 8.
Yeah. So I'm so glad you said that, because I had something that happened once, and I'm a therapist, and I was with a client, and this client unloaded on me, and I got this distinct sense that they actually weren't talking to me. And I said to them, who else is in the room right now? And they were sort of thrown up back on their heels. And I said, because I don't really think you're talking to me. It feels like you're talking to someone else who is as present to you in this room as I am, but it's not me. And I'm just curious if that's true, who it is. And we eventually determined that it was an older brother, and that, they'd had some similar interaction to the one that we were having. And it was, igniting an old ungraduated ghost from the past.
That's so interesting. And the work of understanding our own shadows is the work of a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And if you've experienced trauma, you may need the help of a professional or therapist to help you work with that. And you might need to find an anchor, a safe idea or place or person you can go to if that exploration is too hard for you. But being aware of what's going on can help you dial that down so you can become more present and responsive rather than reactive, to use your earlier framing. And step 3 is about being present. So I've been on many silent retreats, but you don't have to be on a silent retreat. Maybe it's just becoming aware of your breath coming into your body and your breath leaving your body. And of course, we know the biggest distraction is our phone. Even if it's off, even with no notifications, the shiny black screen, we put energy into not looking at that shiny black screen. So out of sight or in another room, maybe with an alarm 5 minutes before the end of the course, so you know that you don't have to worry about the time. And step 4 is about being curious, because once we're curious, once we understand that we cannot assume we already know what the person is going to tell us, then we can find out more about them and connect on a human to human level, whatever their beliefs, whatever their politics are. And it's that connection that allows us to develop empathy and perhaps even respect, as well as being aware of the judgments that we are making about the other person. Hey, Ian, I don't know what judgments you're making about me. Close your eyes for a second and just think. I'm not going to ask you the answer. Okay, you can open them now. But let me tell you that you might have thought, I'm British, I'm English. Well, it's true. I did work at the BBC many years. I did go to Oxford, but actually one of my parents is an immigrant. One of my parents is a refugee. When I was at primary school, I was at free school meals for a while. People put the other person in all this sort of categories. And in fact, many of them might be wrong. And we don't really know what trauma somebody might have undergone in their childhood, because such a large proportion of people have undergone some trauma. And being aware of that can be really helpful. So step 5 is about the gaze. Now, it's quite hard on a Zoom or a Riverside call, the one we're doing now, to look somebody in the eye, and because that means I have to look at the camera and also read their body language. And so actually I've shrunk you so you're quite near the camera, so I can sort of do both. In real life, it is easier. But the reason Zoom and Teams calls are so tiring is we're face to face. Usually when we're face to face, we're either in it for a fight or we're about to kiss. Not what we want to do for most conversations. So actually 60 degrees can work really well. But there's so much research on the power of being able to hold somebody in your gaze. But as I am talking to you, for example, and you're listening to me, I might go on all sorts of journeys, metaphorical journeys. I might be able to look up and imagine new possibilities. But because your gaze is still on me, I feel safer and will then return, and our gaze window will connect again because you've been holding me. Whereas if you look away, I'll think you're distracted. I'll often begin sentences again. And there's also a lot in the book about what is reliable when we're reading people's body language. For example, you might be really smiling, Ian, but that's not because of anything I've said. It's because you're about to snag the last donut off the plate. Yeah? So we misinterpret a lot of facial expressions, tone of voice, and there's lots of subtleties around that, but tone of voice more reliable. And step 6 is about holding the silence, because people are often reluctant about silence. People think that it's the intimidating silence which can extract value from people or silence people. In fact, there are many different types of silence, and I've got an image I painted in a book of the 9 different types of silence. We can have companionable silence, or silence that allows someone to think new thoughts. And the other advantage of silence is that while you're being silent after the person has finished speaking, it allows you to make sense of what they've said. Mm-hmm. And this is important for step 7, which is reflect back. Now, you might have been on an active listening course, Ian, and when you reflect back, you say, yeah, I get you. You paraphrase. This is the reflecting back of deep listening is very, very different. It's about really using all of you to sense make what the speaker has said. What are the notes between their words? And what they are feeling around these. There's the meta-narrative of what they've said across the conversation, as well as the individual thoughts. And then you reflect this back with humility in order to get to step 8, which is about going deeper, their deeper narrative. What's really driving them? What are their values? What are their needs? And you've got the Enneagram to help you understand and people to understand themselves. But as a listener, we can often pick up and sense make, and perhaps use the Enneagram to help us understand more about someone else's needs. And if we are in a relationship of enough trust, we can share them with the other person, for them to understand themselves better, for us to understand them, and for us to be more connected. And there's lots of clues, and I've written a lot about this in the step 7 of my book, Deep Listening, on what clues we can use in the way someone is speaking to understand what's most important, because you don't have to take notes. It's not the whole story. It's understanding what is the most important, what has the most valence for the person speaking, because it's them that you are listening in service of.
So let's do it. Why don't you actually?
Okay.
Let's do a little workshopping of the deep listening modality here.
Okay, Ian. Let me ask you a question. What food, Ian, reminds you of home?
So, Emily, this is quite funny. So, my family lived in London for many years, and I had a nanny growing up. And she cooked for us, and she's gone now, but she lives so deeply inside of me. And every Sunday was corned beef and cabbage. and it would steam up the windows in the house, and with little peppercorns pushed into the meat. And so whenever I smell that, I think of home.
So it took you a second to get there. But then once you got to the corned beef and cabbage and the importance of this nanny who you had such a close relationship with, it was a all sense experience. It wasn't just the peppercorns pushed in the beef. It was the steaming of the windows that brings you back to that sense I even have of perhaps safety of this nanny and the feeling she gave you. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And tell me more.
Well, so the house I grew up in was very chaotic and very unpredictable. Emotionally, psychologically, it was not a very safe place. But Nanny she was the headwaters of grace in my life, just of kindness, of stability, of presence. And she was a very simple woman in many ways. But I learned to appreciate the role that she played in my life, that it was really salvific. I mean, she really sort of saved me and my brothers and sisters from probably a lot of developmental harm. And so, she's, in fact, here in my office, I have a small altar to my nanny with her glasses are on it. Her little rosary beads are on it. Her picture is over there. And so every day I say, "Hey, Nanny."
And so there's a sense that she played such a role, an anchor, even saving you. You talked about not only you, but your siblings in this chaotic and unsafe childhood, the stability that she offered, not just the roast beef, but everything that came from it, was absolutely, you owe her, you feel you owe her a lot. There's a lot to credit her for. And that it's not just about the past that she's able to play that role. The fact that you have an altar to her now that you're proud of, that you touch it, you see her, the rosary, the glasses, the connection with that ongoing sense of safety that emanates has been important even now for you in your life. Yeah? Is that right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. We're talking, she died 40 years ago. And she remains a, part of my, great cloud of witnesses, my ancestors, that I hold that I treasure, I wouldn't be who I am had it not been for her.
And I sense just this, you feel such a strength of gratitude to what she's given you and continues to give you. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, a tremendous debt of gratitude. And as I age, the more I realize how important a role she played in my life. I think when I was even 40, I wouldn't have been able to say, I'd have said, "Oh, Nanny was wonderful. I loved her. She was like my mother." I'd have said all that. But from this distance now, I can look at it and go, "Oh no, she was kind of an angel sent my way." Like she was somebody that, like I said, she wasn't a very complicated person, but in as much as I knew, right? But she was like a lighthouse, is just there, lighting the way, but not, and just very stable, very, 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 in a world that felt very chaotic and in which I often felt disequilibrated, like on ground that felt very unstable.
That's such a strong metaphor of this lighthouse, the stable lighthouse. And you mentioned twice that she was simple, or at least that you knew, but there was a lot of respect and a learned respect as you age to the contribution that she gave.
Yeah, because I've come to understand, I think, the value of fealty and loyalty. She was very loyal, and that's a rare trait. But she radiated a kind of unfailing loyalty.
We could continue here because I'm feeling I'm really getting to know you, and I'm grateful for your honesty on your own podcast and sharing the story of your nanny. What's her name, by the way, so we can give her?
Oh, bless her heart. And her name was Ethel Rita Baker, and she was from Lytham St. Anne's, and lived with us for 25 years. So she was not someone who was just in our life for a year or two. It was 25 years of her presence in our lives, and it was really quite a gift.
Wow, that sounds really powerful and impactful. So, how did that conversation feel like, Ian?
It was great. One thing I noticed, which I was impressed by, and people won't be able to see. Some will see clips of this podcast, but they won't see the whole of it. Was when I went like that, and you could tell that I was moving in a different direction, you got very quiet very suddenly. Like you paused at a point in our conversation when you could have easily motored through, right? But you paused because you observed my body language and waited to see what was on the other side of my gesture. What was I going to say on the other side of that gesture, which I loved. The thing that strikes me about the whole process, and I think this is a wonderful process for all of our listeners to think about, and I encourage them to get the book, Deep Listening, Transform Your Relationships with Family, Friends, and Foes, what is just the importance of empathy. So you were mentioning earlier that, and I actually just ran across a podcast with this fellow the other day. I don't know this man, so I can't speak to his credibility or his credentials, but he's a hostage negotiator. And I'm sure you've read probably his work, Chris Voss. And he talks about strategic empathy, which is sort of a strange term, but I understand what he's getting at. This idea that the other person in high risk or high difficult conversations, particularly with hostages, right? When you're hostage negotiating, these are high risk, high stakes conversations. Just how important it is to establish empathy. That is like, for him, it's like the key is empathy. Like that, the hostage taker has to know that you empathize with their situation.
And what's so critical, I don't know if you noticed, that I was at no stage giving a judgment. I didn't say this nanny was a really good woman or anything. I was just reflecting what you were thinking. Roughly, how many questions did I ask you, Ian? Roughly. Just have a stab. Just roughly.
Oh, I don't know. 6 or 7.
I asked 2 questions. First question was, tell me about a food that reminds you of home. And then when you closed it and said, yeah, you've got it. And then I said, tell me more. And tell me more is the one question you can ask, because that allowed you to say what more was. I'm a journalist. I had loads of questions. I might want to know, what were your family doing in Britain? How come you hired a nanny called Ethel? Were your family really wealthy? Was your family a diplomat? Loads of questions. People in Britain didn't generally have nannies for a while. What was it that made your family have a nanny? Did you have so many siblings? Loads of questions I could have asked, but I would have taken you down where I wanted to go. And instead, all I did was do my best to try and reflect back where your energy was, where you wanted to take me, which allowed you to go deeper on something which was really meaningful for you, not to allow me to, to go down mine. Now, it doesn't mean in the real world that we don't have to ask questions. Often, especially in a work context, we really need to know a particular answer. But these are moments of deep listening, even in the midst of ordinary conversations, which can allow us to connect, develop empathy, and have far more profound encounters with another person. And, that's what really motivates me in this work, that if more people can listen more profoundly to the people around them and to strangers and neighbors and colleagues, we can do something to combat the two crises of our lifetime, or one of the two big crises of being loneliness and polarization. And that's what I hope more people will read the book and then feel inspired and equipped to have these types of conversations.
Can I say an observation? Or did you have something to say? The thing I loved about what you did, when we talk about active listening, where you sort of repeat factual information that's being said, what I noticed was like you entered into Ian's story, and it was like, as you reflected his story, it was almost like the music to the film you were watching, all of a sudden the volume came up. It's like he was describing, but then you sort of came in this way that kind of enhanced and your observation, the way you entered into the story. All of a sudden I felt like I was seeing a clearer picture of what Ian just told, which was beautiful. I love that.
Thank you for that. Although I would say that I often get things wrong, and I don't want people who are starting to practice deep listening think that they've got to get it right all the time. The main thing is to offer your perspective with humility, because Ian can say, well, it actually wasn't quite like that, but it was like this. And in him, correcting, clarifying, or negating my interpretation, he understands himself more clearly, and then I can understand him more clearly. So don't worry about getting it wrong.
Anthony, we need to do a show on the challenges and strengths of each Enneagram type when it comes to deep listening, which they would likely encounter, right?
Yeah. And I would say because there I was interrupting and showing my natural 8-ness, but because I do think that I am in your classification of, an 8 and a 7, this deep listening shtick is not my natural space. I'm not like one of those naturally really quiet, reflective people. And I say this to encourage other people that they can learn to deeply listen, even if it's not their natural space. And they can use it to enhance their understanding. And even if they are a 7 or an 8, and when they're feeling defensive, want to control or want to push things away and be enthusiastic or cheer everyone up, they too can learn to be with other people's stories in order to understand that person better and provide a space to lower their blood pressure and their heart rate and connect more deeply with themselves and with the other person.
Yeah. So it's so interesting. When we started our conversation in this podcast, and even now after the deep listening exercise we just did, which illustrates these 8 steps, if you will, I was watching, there's certain energy cues or clues that you can pick up with different types of people, right? And one that is often seen with 7s and 8s is what I call pressured speech. So it's just slightly pressured. So you almost feel as if we have an expression over here where we say, oh, they're out over their skis. So it's like you're leaning way into the hill, right? And you have that energy in your speech pattern, right? It's a little bit like you can feel the energy of wanting to participate, wanting to go, wanting to engage, wanting to say something, right? But as we did the exercise, that energy pulled way back, right? You just became much more grounded, more like the plumb line was deep, and you were just holding space, right? Because sometimes like a 7 and 8, sometimes a 3, these types can be, we call those 3 types, 3, 7, and 8s, the assertive stance, right? They are assertive. They have, interesting with 8s, sometimes 8s have what we call oppositional energy. So sometimes you'll feel with an 8, sometimes like they're pushing a little bit against you, like just testing you, pushing and testing. And it can be very subtle. It's almost a it's almost a feeling or an energy you're picking up, as if they're kind of just pushing you a little bit to see what's what here, right? Now, other types are much more, they have what I would call a lower energy field. Nines would be an example of this, and nines are great listeners by nature. Fours are very good listeners. Twos can be good listeners. They have to dial back this sort of histrionic thing sometimes if they're off the leash, too carbonated, too effervescent, too much love, too much, joy, right? And I'd say with our ones, they have to dial back sort of this inner filter of judging or criticizing as they listen. That filtering it through an internal critic. So every type has to sort of think, okay, well, what are my particular listening challenges and strengths, right? Because as you said, not everybody is a natural, by nature, disposition, temperament, natural listeners,
Can I say something else that you hit on? As a songwriter and producer, I always say, the space between the notes is important as any note you play. And I feel like the space before you asked, tell me more, was really impactful. Like there was space and then tell me more. And I felt like the space was as important as the question that followed. Really, really powerful.
Yeah, that's very beautiful, Anthony. In my book, I quote a guy, George Prochnet, who wrote a whole book on silence, and he says that silence molds sounds.
Ooh, I love that. Silence molds sounds. Can you talk about the listening with the third ear?
Yeah, so in listening with a third ear is a phrase that was coined by Theodor Reich, and he was one of the first pupils of Sigmund Freud in Vienna, and he later went on to the US and became a psychotherapist. And the idea here is that you don't just listen intellectually with the two ears either side of your brain, but you listen with your intuition, with your gut, with your heart. And so my sense making isn't only done intellectually when I'm listening to you. I'm listening to myself. I'm seeing how physically I'm responding to you and trying to distinguish between my own stuff and your stuff that feels relevant and helpful and in service of you. And it's that third ear. And I painted that picture of it in my book, and that kind of inspires me, that allows me to draw upon a deeper understanding of what it is like to be you. I mean, we never truly know what it is like to be another person because we haven't experienced life in their skin, but we can intuit and offer our interpretation to them for them to correct or clarify or deny that.
So as we wrap up, let me ask you just a couple of questions. The first one is this. What's your favorite emotion? Or what one of your favorite emotions?
Curiosity, is that an emotion?
I don't think it would be classified as an emotion, but I understand what you're saying. I don't want to give a right answer, wrong answer.
Yeah. There's something that I'm interested in at the moment and exploring more about is aliveness, if that's an emotion. It's like when you can be your truest self, when you can discard the parts of yourself which get in the way and be your truest self as yourself and in connection with others.
Thomas Merton, the work of Thomas Merton would be so interesting for you to read, who really
I'll have to write that down.
Well, Merton was a very interesting character. He was a Trappist monk who in the 1950s wrote a spiritual memoir titled Seven Story Mountain that became a global bestseller. John Updike called it the most important spiritual memoir since Augustine's Confessions. And he wrote it when he was 28 years old. Now, he was a very new convert to Catholicism. He'd been a student at Columbia. He was an artist, a writer. He was a scalawag on top of that. And he had this profound sort of conversion experience and goes to become a Trappist monk and then went on to write 90 books. And he really coined in modern parlance this conversation around true versus false self, or authentic self versus illusory self. Or you might say Ian Cron in in quotation marks, and then Enneagram, right? Like without quotation marks. So that's a wonderful feeling, though, of authenticity, right? Of being it's almost a non-egoic place, right? Where the ego is not concerned about its self-presentation. It is so free of the constraints of ego that now you're simply radiating. That's where you can say the masks are down, the persona is down, and now you're just, the light within is just radiating unobstructed, right? That's a kind of beautiful, beautiful place. I was interested to hear if you would say that one of your favorite emotions was inspiration, inspired. That feeling of, it's fairly clear that, have you taken I'm sure you have, at some point, the Big Five, the personality, the Big Five inventory?
No, not that one.
So, okay. Well, so it's sort of the gold standard measure of personality in psychology, right? It's called the Big Five. And one of the categories one of the scales that it looks at is something called openness to experience. And
yeah, I'm high up on that.
Yeah, that's what I'm picking up. And very high openness to experience. Awe would be something that I would imagine is a feeling you love.
Yeah. I'm interested in awe. Yeah.
So awe, inspiration, and this is not a religious term, but the term transcendent, the transcendent, something. This maybe the word could be numinous, almost. Like that feeling of that kind of breathtaking moment, that revelation, ideas, and or that moment that comes when you see overlapping patterns and you make connections that you previously had not seen, and now something new has been born, and you go, oh,
or even
a universe just exploded.
Yeah, completely. Or when somebody says something that challenges what you've thought before, or you put somebody in a box and you've judged them in a certain way, and then they've told you something which makes you realize your prejudices and your assumptions about them are false. I do love those moments.
So in closing, what I would say is, I never tell people their type, but I oftentimes say, I suspect, right? You have a lot of 7 energy. Words like curious keep coming up. Words like inspired. You use the word inspired or inspires like 4 or 5 times in this conversation. What I'm picking up is not, the 7s are called the enthusiasts. That's their name, right? Some other teachers call them the epicures, because they also love the finer things of life. And it could be beautiful fountain pens or a gorgeous meal, or, they have, kind of interesting takes on the finer things, I should say. That's enough to say. And you have a kind of 7-ish energy that and it's quite lovely, because it's beautifully childlike, not childish, but childlike. It's this openness to the new, an attraction to discovery, that kind of energy. And it's quite lovely. And 7 with an 8 is particularly strong, is a very strong combination, but I feel a lot of that 7 energy in you. But that remains up to you. If you choose to learn more about the Enneagram and learn more about types, you can determine it for yourself. But that's my observation based on our conversation.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a very illuminating, inspiring conversation, and it's going to leave me with lots of interesting thoughts to pursue. And thank you so much, Ian. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you, Emily. And I want to remind everybody, Emily Kasriel's new book, please check it out. Deep Listening, Transform Your Relationships with Family, Friends, and Foes. We live in a time when deep listening may be critical to our survival. So, Anthony, thank you, my friend.
Yes, sir. Yeah, good to be with you. Good to be with you, Emily.
Once again, another wonderful conversation. And to all of you listening, may you have love, may you have joy, may you have peace, may you have healing, may you have rest. Until next time.